We'll talk about the titles a little bit later. But you'll notice the big concrete cross on the ground, and also you'll notice marks in the sky. So the lines in the sky are a method of visualizing the invisible, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And so, you know, it's probably, I imagine, difficult to make out on your end on the screen over the broadcast. When you do have the opportunity to actually see them in person, those marks in the sky are a little bit more legible. But people often, their first impression is that they result from long exposures. It's kind of like a motion blur in the sky. But what's actually happening there is, and the idea is that you're able to see this when you look when you're able to get closer to the images, is that each of those marks is representing a satellite, current satellite in the sky at that time.
So many people, when they first see them, they imagine that they're star trails, because we've seen images like that of long exposures of the stars tracking over the sky. But if you look carefully, on each line, there's a little dot, and then there's some stuff you can't read probably, which is actually the title of the name of the satellite. So each dot is the position of a contemporary satellite at the moment of photographing. And then the arc is where it came from and where it's headed. So these are actually just like tiny slices of time. They're kind of a snapshot of one moment of all the satellites in the sky at that time.
And if you can't make it out now, we have some detail images where you'll be able to see that a little bit more clearly here in a minute. But just to kind of provide a little bit more context. So of course, we talked a little bit about what's in the sky, and then the other portion of the image, the ground, there are these large concrete calibration marks. They measure about 60 feet across, just sort of this X cross pattern. And they're actually, as I mentioned before, they were built for the first satellite imaging program. They were used to help interpret the images.
And that first satellite space program was used for spying on the USSR and China and her allies. So it's kind of interesting to think about the way that politics drives technology sometimes. So we use this relationship between the ground and the sky to observe the ways that we're connected to vast systems of information. And those systems of information are unobserved above us. So we use this kind of technology all the time to get to where we're going for communications. We found rich detail in the history of the program, the space program, as well as in the circumstance of being orbited by all of these metal objects around Earth.
And so, it's often helpful to kind of to understand a project by understanding kind of where it began. And so we wanted to just really briefly show you where this all started. It actually traces back to this, it's like a blog post on the New York Times where there were, at the time, these marks in the Gobi Desert that people were trying to figure out what purpose they served, and because they're like large, massive works that didn't have a clear purpose, and so in the comments, somebody mentioned that they thought they might be for calibrating satellite imagery. And they posted a reference to one of these marks that we later would photograph, and posted the GPS coordinates, and it was like an hour away from us. So we kind of just put it on the back burner and planned someday to visit it, just as a matter of curiosity. We didn't know at the time that it was something we necessarily wanted to turn into a project, even turn into a single image, let alone a project.
So you're looking at a kind of graphic satellite image of the spaces where these crosses are contained. And you'll notice that there's a patchwork of agricultural land, there's mountainous land, there's open desert. So you're going to see lots of different examples of different contexts. So as Damon said, when we first found out about these crosses, we thought there was one. And then eventually we made a field trip to go see this cross. And just on the way, we actually saw another one. And so over the course of a couple of years, actually, we were combing through Google Earth and then reassembled a map of over 200 original crosses. I believe there's 180 left today. Many of them have been removed. So we're zooming in here, and I think the next slide is maybe you might see tiny dots.
Well,
is that right?
Here, yeah, first we're going to see
yeah.
a grid. So you can see that this grid that's overlaying right now is a mile, marks, intersections every mile, and you'll see the grid marks here, both the numbers and letters that correspond with each line. And so we have another image here, which I'm not sure if you can see it, but there are little white dots at those intersections. Maybe you can see them. Those are the actual symbols highlighted here in white. So just to kind of get a sense of scale, we realize maybe you can't see them at all. If you can, they're probably literally just a pixel. So it's hard to understand. So same information scaled up 12 times. You can begin to see kind of how the marks are positioned, that they are at every intersection, but also that there's some irregularity, there's some that are missing. But generally you get a pretty good sense of what the entire grid looks like.
So remember, each of these crosses is 60 feet in diameter. So it's an enormous amount of resources and labor that it took in the 1960s to build these. And that's kind of interesting because it's kind of a footnote to the Cold War, even though there's this elaborate area of these concrete markers. They're not designated in any way. They're not protected or preserved in any way. They're just out there.
And so this is just another way of kind of looking at similar information. This is just a Google Earth satellite view. So this happens to show, because of the location, it shows kind of clearly how you can actually see all the marks in that one view. So even at this zoom where we can see just over sort of a square mile, you can actually see the relationship between the four intersections.
So each of the concrete crosses has a center point that has a metal stamped piece. And you might be able to read, it says Corps of Engineers, US Army, AF49, $200, $250 fine or imprisonment for removing the mark.
So that's right up there. The title is right up. The mark designation is right there.
And then you might also see that year 1966. So all of the ones that we found were built between 66 and 68. So kind of height of the Cold War.
And so this is actually the first site that we visit. This isn't the image that we made that first visit, but it's the first location that we visited. At the time, like Julie said, we actually passed another one on the way there. So if we had just learned at that moment, there was actually more than one of these symbols. But it's a pretty important site for us just because it's the first one that we actually got to kind of experience. And we always talk about the scale of these marks, and in fact, you mentioned it earlier, that it's hard to get a sense of the scale for the images. It's also hard to kind of get a sense of scale of these marks, but they really are kind of impressive, sort of places to experience, because they just these massive kind of mysterious marks, seemingly randomly in random locations.
So we're going to show you, the next image is actually of this site, but it's on the first site visit. So we want to show you kind of how we how we changed what we were doing over time. So the first time we visited the site was we did what any photographer might do. We walked around it, we made detail images, we looked at it from all these different vantages, and then we thought we came up with a convention. We thought we need a little bit of height to get above the concrete so you can see the full cross. So this is the first finished image from the first draft of the project. So we thought we were going to just photograph all of them like this, and that would be it. So you can see it's in landscape format. It's a different shape rectangle. It's wider than it is tall. And we just included a little bit of the horizon.
It doesn't look like it, but we're actually, the cameras for this version, the camera is actually a little bit above 10 feet in the air. But you know, there were sort of several factors, but we essentially arrived at a point in the project where we had an opportunity to kind of reevaluate how we were making the images. And so we really wanted to kind of go back to some of the original assumptions we made about the project. And we ultimately decided that we actually wanted to change the orientation of the images rather than photographing them as horizontal landscape format images. We wanted to change that orientation to the vertical format. And the sort of reason, or one of the reasons we wanted to do that was because, again, thinking back to the original purpose of these marks, the purpose being that it essentially is a reference for something that's in the sky, that's unseen, that's passing overhead, but we have no way of knowing that it's there. And we thought that by turning the orientation, and also you'll see here there's more sky than there is ground. We're actually privileging the sky more than we are the ground in this composition. That allowed us to make that reference to what's unseen, to give it a kind of visual weight, even if it's not literally visible in the image.
And then this would be the final draft, like the images that you see in the exhibition, where I believe Damon actually found this software where we could map the contemporary satellites present in the sky at the moment of photographing. So the last draft was including this data map. So they're kind of like three things at once. I like to think about them as aesthetic artifact, historic document, and also data map. They're kind of art and science at the same time.
And so now we're making sort of literal reference. In the previous version, we were just kind of alluding to the presence of those satellites. Now we're literally showing the presence of those satellites. And one of the reasons we thought it was so important, I mean, I think just aesthetically, we find it really kind of beautiful, the sort of, the way that it sort of carves up the sky, but it also allows us to really kind of illustrate how many satellites are up there, how much information there is kind of invisible overhead. And so we thought it was really important to kind of draw that out in the imagery as well.
So we're just going to focus on the map for a moment so you can see what it looks like on its own. And I believe we're going to zoom in. Is that right, Damon?
Yeah.
So you can see now that the titles of the names of each satellite are present in the maps as well. And so in the gallery, if you put your nose up close to the print, you can actually read those satellite names. And they're kind of interesting. Some of them tell you what they do. Some of them say GPS, for example. Some of them say Brazil Sat. So they kind of reference where they're from. And some of them are just beautiful and kind of spacey, like Cosmos.
All right. And then we often, people are often interested in the sort of process that goes into making these images. So we've made a video that sort of illustrates the different sort of stages in the process. So we'll play that now. We realize it's not, it's kind of not ideal in the sense that it's
a little choppy.
it's going to be a little choppy, but it still, I think, is worthwhile because you can get a sense of what the process looks like, even if it's not perfectly smooth. But maybe we can, I don't know if Tommy can actually paste the link in there, or maybe he already did, but you can view it on YouTube, of course, if that's.
So we're starting it now. We haven't started it yet. If you're panicked, there we go.
So we're going to try to just let you watch mostly, but I do want to kind of talk through what you're seeing. So this is just some context for some drone footage context for this particular site, X48. And then this is a sort of time lapse of us actually making the original photographs. And so of course we're looking for the right vantage point, figuring out where we want to position our camera. We always position the camera the same distance from the center, although different sort of angles off of the center. And then we raise the camera up about 16 feet in the air here and control both the gimbal and the camera remotely. Most images will be making, usually 9 to 12 images that we will, you'll see in a minute, we'll stitch together. And we do that because, as we said earlier, we really want to get the most detail in these images possible. And so we want sharpness and resolution there. And so we'll essentially use portions of each of the images and blend those together to make sure we have a nice high resolution composite that's sharp throughout the image area. And once we have that, then we can go back to all the information about the original capture. So when, where, the elevation, the angle of view. And we can plug all of that information into the satellite software so that we then have the virtual vantage point in the software matches our actual vantage point with the camera. And then from there, it's a time-consuming process of looking up each satellite, figuring out where it is in frame, and building satellite by satellite the map that ultimately is overlaid in the background.
We had no idea what we were getting into when we started this mapping part of the project. We thought, oh, that'll be interesting to see how many satellites are present now. And there's sometimes almost 200 in the sky at any given moment. So it's really labor intensive. This is the part of the project that takes us a couple of weeks at least, both of us working on them.
And of course, that number is only increasing too. So we'll see. Hopefully it won't take us too much longer to make these maps. So you can see some of them, particularly with some orientations, they actually get pretty complex. They're essentially satellites on top of satellites. So the maps at times and in certain locations get really dense with information. So once we have that map constructed, it's an Illustrator files, vector information. So we'll take that into Photoshop and blend that in. We mask out all the terrestrial objects. And so essentially the map only is in front of the sky, and we just sort of blend that back, and at that point we have a finished image. That's it.
Okay. So you might notice this cross is made from rock. We're going to show you another image and talk more about that, but we're going to kind of zoom in again for some details of this image. So we were interested in the way that the radio towers were present. So it's another kind of invisible technology that's referenced in the image. And then pretty soon up here, you're going to see the moon, which is almost as big as a satellite spot in the image. So again, we really like them, the possibility of printing them large enough that you can actually really study them.
And another aspect of this project that we really enjoy is going back to that map view that we looked at earlier, where where it's sort of cut up in this grid. It sort of reminds us of an archaeological grid. And we like that idea of kind of like surveying an area. And we kind of treat these marks as kind of predetermined locations. We know we're going to show up and make an image, but we don't really know what is going to be there when we show up. And so we like the opportunity of being able to kind of choose a vantage point that creates a relationship between that mark and its context, and the way that, you know, either the context has changed or maybe it hasn't changed. And there are always these kind of rich opportunities in terms of that relationship.
In this case, we're in an agricultural context. We really love the way that the farmer kind of, you know, moved his machinery all around this mark, making his own marks. So there's all kinds of contexts that we encounter. Sometimes we're in suburban areas, because again, it's a 16 square mile grid, so it covers a lot of ground. Occasionally we'll have people come up to us and ask us what we're up to, and that's always kind of fun and interesting. This one gets really complicated because it's kind of two different human-made networks that are combining in the image, this ground network of wires with the satellite imagery. There's a lot of changes happening in the area where we're photographing. It's about an hour to an hour and a half south of Phoenix, depending on which part of the grid you're photographing on. And it's about halfway to Tucson, which is the other big city. And there's a lot of building things getting built up around there. A lot of these power lines being installed.
And this is,
oops, sorry about that.
Yeah, this is actually that same sort of like transmission line that we were looking at in the previous image. We made this image first, and it probably is hard to tell, but you actually, they hadn't sort of hung the wires yet, so they just had the columns. But so it's kind of interesting that even in the time that we've been photographing, there are these kind of changes that are happening in the area.
And certainly a lot of the crosses are in states of decay. You might notice that in different images. Some of them are well preserved and some of them are kind of falling apart. I think we have some examples of that towards the end of the presentation. So here's another one that's made of rock. And so this is at elevation. It's on the top of Casa Grande Mountain. And the other one that was made of rock was also on the way up slope. So we hypothesized that the Army Corps of Engineers didn't want to carry the weight of the concrete up the hill, essentially, because even water, which is required for concrete, is 8 pounds per gallon. So instead, they used the native volcanic rock to form these sites. And we really love these markers because they look like Paleolithic kinds of constructions. And it just reminds us that we've always, as human beings, tried to orient ourselves in space, tried to orient ourselves with the sky.
Yeah, and so to get back to the title, so the project title, Ground Truth, that's a term that actually comes from remote sensing, and it's a term that's used to describe being able to measure something on the ground directly, measure it directly, and then use that information to infer knowledge about something else. So part of the way these symbols were used was to, of course, it's in a top secret spy context, so they can't directly measure the things they're trying to observe, right? So having this grid of marks where they know not only the exact size of each of the marks, but also the distance between the marks, allowed them then to interpret the imagery that sort of comes from the opposite, side of the globe, and be able to understand how large a runway is, for example. And so, that's a really kind of like interesting idea to us. And because we're intentionally photographing these from the ground, and we talked about earlier, making these references to the sky above.
We were really excited this day because it was cloudy. We woke up and there was like a fog over Phoenix, which is very, very rare. So we got ready really quickly and headed down. And you'll notice that with the overcast skies, we're using gray lines so that the marks are visible. We have different conventions for what the marks look like depending on what the sky looks like. But we were really excited about the weather. We do have some of the most beautiful skies in the world, I think, here in Arizona. Maybe it's true in Texas as well. I think Texas might be big sky country as well. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that comes up is something that comes up for any, I guess, most photographers that are working with conditions that they can't control. It really makes you aware of your surroundings in a different way, in a really heightened way. And so this little bit of light on this building was there for only a moment. And so it really, spending time in the field makes us more aware of time, and I
mean, not to interrupt, but also more aware of that singular position too, like where you in terms of photography, where you choose to put the camera and when, as Julie was saying, when you decide to make that image. But also that sort of relates to our wider experience on Earth, right? We're these individual people on Earth at a specific time in these singular bodies, right? And so we really kind of enjoy the way that these marks have that kind of like a metaphorical relationship to that idea that there's the singular mark related to this vast kind of network that's overhead, and that's something that we can kind of relate to in our own lives as well.
Just a little bit of, this is one where you can see the cross is almost completely gone. So if you took your boot, you might notice there's a shape of like a triangular shape of the arm at the bottom of the image. And if you took your boot and scraped it across there, you would actually find the concrete underneath the dirt there. So they really are in various, in various states, various conditions. So again, that brings us back to that part of the project that's kind of historic document. And if you want to revisit any of that work, our website is twocircles.org, and we would love to take any questions. I think we'll go back to Amy to moderate the question session.
Yes. Wow, what an interesting, I think we should.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That answered a lot of my questions. Definitely. I didn't know the images were panoramically combined in that way. But yes, I had some questions. We had some questions coming up. Let me just find where they started. But please feel free to ask some questions. Let me see. Okay, are we ready for the first question? Is Damon and Julie, is some of the work referencing surveillance?
Definitely. I think, even just when we changed the orientation of the image so that it's 2/3 sky and 1/3 ground, I feel like even just that, before we started before we started laying in the maps of the satellites, even just having the weight of the sky above us, especially in the age of, I mean, this is not what you're asking, but in the age of drone technology, I think there's, a kind of sense of vulnerability that to be exposed to the open sky. We're photographing, we use an amateur astronomy application. So it's not the satellites that we're mapping. Some of them are military satellites, but they're listed as military satellites. So they're not the secret ones that, it's the public access information that we're actually mapping. Do you have something on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the technology these days is pretty incredible, and I mean, the resolution, even the resolution that we have that's publicly accessible is pretty impressive. Which is to say nothing of the things that we don't know about, the imaging technologies that we don't know about. But yeah, I mean, I think the part of what is interesting for us is that these marks are kind of designed to be seen. They're purpose built to be observed by something in the sky. And so that kind of by definition is sort of draws itself into that conversation around surveillance. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of what's really interesting for us.
Great question, thank you.
The next
Amy.
question. Yes.
Break Tommy. Can you pin Julie?
I think I did, Tommy. I think I did pin Julie. It says, I think it was because right now I unpinned her. What if I spotlighted her?
Yes, please do that.
Oh.
There we go.
Oh, sorry.
There we are.
Okay, the next question is, how long have they been sitting there? I think that means the
crosses?
concretes, yeah, the concrete sort of slabs.
So the ones that all the ones that we've been on the ground with were stamped with 1966 to 1968. Basically that range of dates is when these ones were built. So they have been hanging out for quite a while. When they were built, I like to think about this sometimes because we're using all kinds of technology in the field. When they were built, our cell phones are more powerful computers than what they had computers that were entire rooms, right, that did less than our cell phones do now. So it's kind of amazing that the amount that technology has changed in that amount of time.
And by the way, we didn't really have the opportunity to get into it, but this program, when these were built, the digital technology wasn't good enough. So these were satellites that were carrying film and returning film back to Earth. So just again, the idea of like how much things have changed. It's pretty incredible to think about. The imaging technology alone, how much that's changed.
So yeah, it's a great story. It's a little sidebar, but so yeah, they shot rockets full of with capsules full of film, 140 pounds of film, I think, and panoramic cameras. They shot those into space. They made more pictures than all U-2 planes combined on their first mission. And then they would, the capsules would drop back through the atmosphere, and then eventually parachutes would open, and then they would be caught by plane over the ocean. And then that physical film was trucked to Washington, D.C. to be analyzed. So it's kind of an amazing program.
Yeah, I mean, when you start to learn about the program, you can see why no one is that interested in these concrete marks, because they were doing some pretty incredible, groundbreaking work. So it's understandable that the concrete marks don't really get mentioned very much, but
they're this huge presence in the landscape that remains.
Yeah. yeah, and for us, really interesting.
Next question, really interesting question. What inspired you guys to become photographers?
Oh gosh, you have to go first.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it goes, I think, way back. You know, I think I originally kind of, when I started to pick up a camera and work in the darkroom, I, you know, kind of felt immediately that it was a language that I, that I sort of understood better than other types of languages, I guess, and it's something that felt natural to me, and so it was just kind of like something that I understood intuitively, and then of course, you know, learning more about the ways that photographers and artists used the medium to communicate. I think I just sort of became more and more interested and engaged in it, and couldn't help but pursue it.
Mm-hmm. And then my story is kind of a long and winding path, and because in undergraduate school I studied ecology and evolutionary biology, but I took, in my physics class, we had a pinhole camera, like a workshop one day. Anyway, so I had some exposure to photography, but when I took a workshop for the first time, it kind of felt like the marriage of art and science. And I was drawn, you know, when I was a kid, I used to write poetry, so I was interested in metaphor. So then this medium became this thing where it's kind of like you can say anything you want using these tools. It just seemed really powerful to me.
Thank you. The next question, by the way, we have 10 or so more questions. The next question is building on the question about surveillance. How did people who asked about your project on site react when they learned what the X marks were actually?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's been a variety of kind of interactions. So, you know, I think it seems like a lot of people have some sense of history of what the marks were for, and so, you know, I mean, I think it's probably different when you literally walk out your door and there's a mark, and when you're driving to the grocery store, you're passing 5 or 6 of them. You know, I imagine you probably have a pretty different relationship to those marks. But yeah, I mean, some people sort of understand the history and are excited by it, and we've, you know, talked at length with them, just sort of sharing what we know about the project. Then there are other people who just kind of are very skeptical about why we're even
Like why we care.
Yeah, why we care.
It's a big range. It's a really big range. We've had people come up to us on horseback.
Yeah.
We've had people drive up to us in golf carts. It's kind of interesting. We had the image that was the field with the crops and the lines around the cross. That person just seemed very skeptical. I mean, also because we were on his land. So we had to explain what we were doing, and we showed some sample images, and he felt more comfortable with it at that point.
Next question is, can you explain, oh wait, there's, did you make that painting that's behind you? that's behind.
Yes, that's a Julie piece from graduate school. Actually, if anybody's into printmaking, there's this great program at the University of New Mexico where there's this very famous print shop called the Tamarind Institute, and they pair artists with printers. So it's called Bloodroot, and it's kind of a translation from vegetable to animal. I made it so that I reference blood cells, but it's actually slices of radish that have been enlarged. Yeah, so And we have made all kinds of objects. We've made things out of wood and sculptures and films. And this project is very, very photographic, but we make all kinds of things.
Oh. Can you explain how both the immediate foreground and also the far distant mountains in the picture are completely sharply in focus?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, a result of basically the equipment we're using and the scale of the objects we're photographing, because it's a pretty wide angle lens that we're using, and you know, yeah, I mean, essentially we're focused at infinity. Even if we, you know, when we're focusing on the marks, which are the closest thing to us, even then the lens is still at, you know, focused on infinity. So really everything behind that is going to be sharp as a result.
And it's also a function of the f-stop that we're using. So we're stopped down to usually around f10 or f11 for what we're doing. So the smaller aperture has a greater depth of field. It just means that more of the image appears sharp.
And if you take a photo class with me, we will
Yes,
learn
take a photo class with Amy and you'll learn all about that.
all about this kind of thing. Are there similar sites to this one in Arizona? Are there, and if so, are there any, do you have plans to visit them?
Well, I mean, we still haven't visited all of these marks. Yeah, I mean, there's still over 100 that we haven't visited yet. But yeah, I mean, as far as we know, we don't know of any other grids either in Arizona or anywhere else for that matter. There are other calibration marks, I think in Nevada and California and some other places.
They're like resolution test markers. They look a little, there's nothing that we found that's like a grid of crosses the way that this is, but they look kind of like a seeing eye chart basically for a high camera. And then there's also aerial markers for planes when they were delivering mail. There's these giant arrows that were actually part of like how the postal service navigated. So there's these giant arrows as well.
But yeah, as far as we know, there aren't any of these marks anywhere else that we found.
The next question is, ever thought of mapping the paths of airliners over Arizona at any given time?
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting. I think we feel pretty overwhelmed at the moment just mapping the satellites. So it's kind of terrifying to think of adding anything else to that to map as well. But it would be pretty interesting. It would be a different way of kind of seeing the sky, seeing what's above us. So it certainly could be pretty interesting.
The next question is, how did you discover these crosses? Were you informed by someone, or were they stumbled upon?
Yeah, so we had Damon mentioned this blog from the New York Times blog, right? Yeah, and in the notes, sometimes there's comments in the blog notes, and someone did give the GPS coordinates of one of these crosses. So we did go and visit that one. And then when we were in the car on the way to that, we saw another. So it just kind of, and after that, we started searching online on Google Earth for more crosses and found lots and lots of them. So it was kind of both. It was kind of happenstance and also informed by that first GPS coordinate that someone shared.
So then did you map that out by just the coordinates that you found, and that was not an existing map? You put that map?
Yeah, we built that. And Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we actually have a map on our website. So if you do go to the website, there's an interactive map that lets you kind of navigate the area that we're working in, that the marks are in. And actually, if you click on them, they're different colors based on whether we have a corresponding image made yet or not. But some of them have historic images, and so we're essentially just providing that sort of reference, so we know, even if you can't see it in today's the contemporary satellite view, we have a reference of what it looked like. You know, some of them come from aerial surveys, some of them come from satellite views, but yeah, we kind of use that as a way of researching each of the locations.
Thank you. The next question says, in most images, there is a kind of a manhole in the crosses. What is that?
Yeah, good question.
It is a good question. We actually don't know yet. So they're all the same size. They're all the same depth. Although some of them have they have soil at the bottom of them. They're about 3 feet deep. Some of them have plants growing out of them because it's a natural place for water to fall into, and so it's kind of like a little greenhouse in a way. But they're only about knee deep. We read some stuff online. We've done all kinds of online research, and there was some reference to that maybe they were part of the program that didn't get off fully, that where there were lights somehow connected with those manholes. But they're not quite as cool as you would think, that like they're not like deep tunnels. They're only about knee deep, but it is kind of a mystery still. Great question.
Interesting. I just lost what drew you to collaborate with each other?
So we both went to graduate school together. We didn't know each other before we were in graduate school. And then I I guess I'll just speak for myself that I had a sense that we were working on similar ideas in really different ways. So, you know, I was making a lot of like small, brightly colored objects. Damon was making these enormous monochrome objects. So they looked as completely different, but they seem to be about, I mean, in a really broad sense, about interdependency in some ways. So anyway, we had an opportunity to have a show together, a 2-person show together, and then we made a catalog of our solo works that were brought together. And that was another opportunity to have conversations about what connected the work. So we actually, I think our first collaboration was actually that show where we put together our solo works and kind of tried to articulate what the connections were. And so at that point, I mean, I think it was just sort of like, well, what if we tried making things together? And we are a couple. We're now officially married. Although we've been working together for 15 years, we've been married for less than a year.
I got around to it.
So we're life partners as well as art partners.
Great, great story. The next one, did you communicate with any government agencies? Were there any roadblocks besides the classified information? Good question.
So the roadblocks that we come upon are literal like fences and land designations. So like there's one of these markers, concrete crosses, is in a landfill area. So it's a private, it's a private company. We come across really aggressive no trespassing posted signs sometimes. Some of the markers are on native land. So we feel like we have to be really sensitive. It's not only illegal, it's also just very sensitive. You know, traipsing through, you're not allowed to just traipse through and do what you want on native land. So we haven't actually, we haven't had any roadblocks in terms of the government.
No, I mean, we've tried to do research and just gain, you know, sort of get historic information or imagery, and that, I mean, that becomes difficult just because it's very specific information we're looking for, and it's not sort of readily available. But yeah, no roadblocks in terms of preventing us from doing the work.
The next question is, were the satellite paths imposed on the photos? I guess that means like digitally imposed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we're making, but essentially by hand or by computer, making these maps, custom maps for each location, and then ultimately, yeah, we're using you know, photo imaging software to blend that map into the sky. Hopefully that answers the question.
So, and the maps are made in Adobe Illustrator, and they're overlain in Photoshop. So we're using a couple, and then we use the software, it's called Satellite Safari, is the amateur astronomy application that we use to map the satellites. So we've got a lot of different pieces of software.
Were there pictures that you initially thought were good, but later didn't like the satellite composition?
We haven't really rejected a satellite composition. You're right that we don't know what we're going to get. That's what, I mean, it's kind of like one of the chance operations of the project. One thing is our sites are pre-designated. So we know where we're going. We don't know what we're going to find there. And then we are there when we're there. We're looking in the direction that we choose. And all of that data determines what the satellite map looks like. And so far, we've just been accepting it. I think there's some that we like more than others. Like the first image that I showed you, AC48, the first image from the slideshow is one of our favorites partly because of the beauty of the shape of the satellite map. It's just, it looks kind of like I don't know if anybody, I'm going to date myself here, but the Spirograph toy when you were little, if that makes sense to anybody. Anyway, it looks really graceful. Some of them are like more confused than we would like them to be, but we've just kind of been accepting it. And that's kind of maybe the scientific aspect of the project, that we don't really, we kind of suspend judgment about what is actually in the sky.
The next question is, have you seen the airplane navigation arrows, a similar concept of relating the ground to the sky, maybe another project where you can overlay airway and planes?
Yeah, we have seen those, and yeah, we really, you know, that's on our list. Someday, maybe at least just visit them for fun. Whether or not it turns into images or a project is another question. But yeah, those look pretty interesting, and certainly are very, very much related to these marks that we're photographing.
It would also make a great road trip.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what we'll do.
I like it.
That'd be fun. That sounds like fun. Let's see. How was the weather when taking the photographs? Was it difficult to capture the shots, or too hot?
So some of them we try to do computer work when it's really hot out, like try to have a bunch of images ready to do the mapping part when it's really hot out, but it doesn't always work out. So sometimes we're photographing even in the summer where it can be 115 degrees during the day. On those days, we would try to be done by 9 a.m. So we're traveling down there. It's an hour and a half to get down there. We're photographing, we're investigating, we're photographing, and try to be done because it's actually even too hot for our equipment. We found we start getting like miscommunication, and the electronics don't behave very stably.
Yeah, I mean, that's technically outside of the operating temperature range for our camera anyway, so.
So yeah, sometimes it's challenging that way. It also really changes the way the images look. So, you know, depending on what time of day we choose, I mean, we like a lot of different light conditions. Like you would think that noon would be horrible, but it's actually kind of nice sometimes because it's this really sterile, bleaching kind of light, and it makes the concrete look really good sometimes. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit, I'm not sure that answered the question. I think I just kind of rambled.
No, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's nice is doing a series. We're able to kind of, you know, we don't have to commit to a single way of representing these. We can kind of play with photographing some in certain lighting conditions and others in others. So, but yeah, I mean, for better or worse, we don't have a lot of weather that gets in our way aside from the heat. So we can mostly photograph anytime we want, any time of the year anyway.
Mhm.
What is the favorite of all your works?
Oh man.
From this project?
Um,
From this project, let's say from this project. It's too hard.
Yeah, I can't do the other one.
Do you like AC-48 the best?
It's-
Or maybe the rock one?
Yeah, I think that I could probably I'd have to choose at least three favorite children. But yeah, I'll have to, yeah, anyway, I think this is my favorite.
Oh, neat.
I'll share it real quick. If I can. Oops, let me see, sorry. This one. Or wait, no, that's not the right slide. This one. Just kidding. Yeah. It's just a really unusual one. If you probably can't see on screen, but it's one of the larger prints in the gallery. There are tons of birds on the power lines in the background. I really love those kind of details about it.
And for me, I think it's the rock one that's up on the mountain that I showed you guys. The one that's made of rock, because again, I think it kind of connects with, like when I grew up, part of the time I grew up in Georgia, and there were these, thank you, yeah, there were these Etowah rock mounds, these Paleolithic rock mounds. So I just really like the way this kind of looks like an archaeological marker, even though it's contemporary.
The next question is there another similar project you are working on?
Not similar at all.
Maybe what's your next project?
Yeah, I have another project that is from my solo practice that I'm working on, but it's, well, I mean, the only thing that's related, I guess, is that it involves field work, that it's a landscape-based project, but it's very, very different.
And another question, is there a place, I think this question, is there a place that you would like to show your work, but is there a place that you would like your art to be viewed that hasn't as of yet? A place.
Oh yeah. That'd be
So
nice.
yeah, so we did show at the National Academy of Sciences, which was really wonderful. I think one ideal place would be across the mall from the NAS at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum.
Because they have if anyone has a chance to go there, they have one of the capsules one of the Corona satellites on view as one of their displays. They have a whole sort of section for some of the imaging satellites, but it's pretty neat to be able to see what those satellites look like. They actually have a film running through the whole satellite, so you can kind of see how the cameras worked, or get some sense of how the cameras worked on those.
And they do have a gallery there, and there's millions of people that are interested in space. So it just seems like that would be really wonderful.
Next question is, what kind of camera do you use?
So we use a medium format camera. So it's a phase 1 camera, which it's a 80 megapixel camera that allows us to have a wireless connection, which is really important for us. We were using, we were shooting tethered, and we have to bring a bunch of equipment, like, a laptop, something to put the laptop on, the wire to go up to the camera. And so being able to work wirelessly really is mostly much easier, and allows us to work a little bit more quickly, which is really nice.
The grant that Amy mentioned that the Land Arts program allowed us to buy this camera. So it's kind of out of the price range for most people, including us. It's kind of like as expensive as a car, basically. So it's more expensive than my old car. So anyway, that was helpful getting that grant.
But yeah, I mean, we really wanted that because what we've mentioned in the talk several times, we always felt that it was really important to be able to have the scale of those large prints that are in the gallery. And also to be able to get really close and kind of see equivalent detail between those maps that are in the sky and the detail that's in the ground.
Have you ever shot something in the sky that was unexplainable?
Not that we know of. I don't think.
No.
We do often, pretty regularly, actually. We'll bring the images back and start processing them, and part of our process is just to get rid of all the sensor specs. And so we do pretty regularly see planes that we had no idea were in the image, actually, off in the distance, or somebody walking kind of like on a trail in a mountain in the background, something like that. So they're explainable, but they are kind of surprising.
Okay, and I think this is going to be our last question. Have you seen, the airplane navigation arrow is a similar concept of relating the ground to the sky. Wasn't this already? I'm sorry. Oh, so that was I think that was answered. So I think it looks like we went through all our questions.
I love the comments too. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to read the chat after the fact. The rock one is my favorite too. I love that person.
This is great.
And it does look like land art. In fact, some of the, I think it was maybe Wired. Anyway, one of the people that wrote about the project kind of made that connection before, which is interesting, I think. Thank you so much, Amy and Tommy and everybody.
This was great. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks everyone for participating. I learned a lot actually of things behind the scene and the process that I didn't know about. So it was really fun. I think everyone had a lot of fun. The work was interesting. Let me just do this one if I can. Before we go, I'll just do one more sort of with my high tech. This high tech. This is our gallery, everyone, at UT Permian Basin. So please come by. Whoa. I'm gonna step in front of my video light here. Please come by. It's much more interesting if we see the real print. The digital is good, but you can see all the little details. You can see all the grass, the rocks, the poles, everything. So please come by. It looks very different from seeing it on the screen. But otherwise, thank you. And if you're a student, we have a little survey at the end. So please take the survey before you leave. Otherwise, I think we will end the webinar, and then Damon and Julie, we just have like a wrap up, another webinar. So we'll just tune in, see if you can find the next. I think Tommy just set something up for us too, just to wrap it up. But I'll end this one right here.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm good. We'll end it here. I'll just do.